It was waist-deep in snow when the men from the supply line got to Dunwich on March 4th, 1862. They came to deliver medicine and coal, which is something that is usually done twice a winter when the roads allow it. But something wasn't right that morning, as their sled squeaked across the icy path and the first chimneys of Dunwich could be seen. No one was calling out from porches. There was no smoke, and there were no footprints or kids chasing the sleds. Nothing but stillness. There was such silence that even the horses shook. At first, they thought that everyone in town might be inside being cold on another cold Vermont morning. But when they opened the mayor's front door and saw him lying in bed in winter flannel, his face was calm and his eyes were closed, as if he were praying, they knew something terrible was wrong. Every time they went from house to house, it was the same thing. People of all ages were lying in their beds, on couches, or in chairs next to fireplaces that were very cold. No blood or disease, just signs of a fight. Everyone in the town, all 43 people who lived there, had died, but not in a violent or even painful way. They had just stopped. And this part scared me the most even before I went to that town. In Dunwich, all of the clocks had stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. Some of them were wall clocks. It was a pocket watch. Some were the kind that needed to be wound every day, but they all stopped at the same time, as if time had stopped inside. My name is Dr. Isaac Morrow. I was sent by the state to look into what had happened in Dunwich in the spring of 1862. I've learned about cholera, typhoid, battlefield shock gas exposure, and even religious hysteria, but this is the first time I've seen something like it. People in Dunwich did not die of fear. They died without a fight. At the same time, and not a single one of them tried to stop it. The story of a town that chose to sleep over living and never woke up. Listen up, if you're still there. This is not the kind of story you listen and then forget. Because you might look at the clock a little differently after you find out what happened in Dunwich. Dunwich was a quiet town in the lower hills of Vermont before it was turned into a tomb. It was tucked between a half-frozen river and the forest that led into the Green Mountains. It was never big or busy, and maps made after 1850 don't show it very often. Established in 1819 by a group of families who moved there from the province of Carinthia in Austria, Dunwich has always been there. They are spiritually and geographically far apart. Its people were not strict Catholics or Puritans like many of their neighbors. Their beliefs were more traditional, less harsh, and based on fire and brimstone. They were known as the disciples of the still water. Outside of town, no one ever seemed to know what that meant. In public, they read quietly, held silences together, and went for long walks through the trees. They didn't follow the traditional Sabbath, but they did set aside every seventh day as a day to settle down and not use any tools. Before noon, no words were said. Most people in nearby villages thought they were harmless, weird, and nice. They bought and sold wool candles and herbal medicines. They almost never married someone from outside their group, and they almost never left Dunwich for good. They were fearful, but not in the paranoid sense of the word. They just thought the noise outside was too much. So, they built a safe place to be quiet. The town had been covered in snow for almost 4 months by the time I got there in March. It was the last visit from anyone been outside since late November, when Whit Haynes, a local trapper, brought firewood to the town and said it felt quieter than usual. That was the last time anyone in Dunwich was heard from before the thaw. They had a lot of supplies. They sold a lot of roots. The coal bins were mostly empty. There was a stack of wood. The beds were made up nicely. In fact, the town felt ready in every way, even when people were dead. That was the thing that bothered me the most as I moved from one place to another. There wasn't any. Not a single door was kicked open, a chair was flipped over, water was spilled, or messages were scrolled quickly out of desperation. In some homes, even the candles were burned all the way down to the wick. It was like the town knew it was going to die. It was like the moment had been planned. That made me wonder something I couldn't get rid of. What kind of community gets ready not to stay alive, but to give up? No one touched the bodies. That was the first thing that caught my eye. Not the quiet or the cold, but the way everything is put together. Everyone, a woman and a child in Dunwich, both died with their arms lying flat on their sides or crossed gently over their chests. Not a single finger or jaw was curled or clenched to show pain. They looked calm and peaceful, and some of them even smiled. It didn't look like death. They weren't just in beds, it looked like they were sleeping. An older couple was holding hands in rocking chairs in front of a cold fireplace. A teenage boy was lying down in his Sunday coat, as if he had just laid down. To take a break. A baby was found in its mother's arms, both of them wrapped in the same woolen shawl. But they were all gone. There was no blood, vomit, bruises, or shaking to show that there had been violence. I looked at 17 of the 43 bodies by myself. Lungs are clear, pupils are dilated normally, there is no foaming or swelling, and the body temperature is normal for the time of death, which could have been 3 or 4 weeks ago. But every house had one thing in common that no scientist could explain. Each. A small square of parchment was held by a dead resident somewhere on or near their body. Some people fold them up and put them under their hand, sometimes tucked between fingers like a note of goodbye. It was sometimes laid on top of the chest, just below the collarbone. Each piece of paper had a single handwritten word on it. Every time is different. The mood has changed. It's enough to be quiet. The songs she sings between the hours sound poetic, mysterious, and biblical, but none of them were directly from the Bible. One piece of paper found on a child's pillow. The note said, "She told me stories in my sleep. Who she was, I did not yet know." But these weren't suicide notes, apologies, or pleas for help. They read like responses, like answers given after a long conversation that no one else had heard. They were all over the place, stacked in drawers, between book pages, folded into coat linings, and tucked into herb jars. Dozens of voices all going over the same idea. Rest, return, rejoin. It was as if the town had been getting ready for something welcome instead of something bad. The Dunwich chapel bell rang 3 times a day, once at dawn, once at noon, and once at twilight. The sound echoed down the valley like breath caught in a bottle, and people living miles away in Lower Glenbrook said they could feel it in their ribs, especially on snowy mornings. Then, one day in January, it stopped. People thought a storm had damaged the tower, but it wasn't. It hadn't been noticed because it had snowed so much that winter, and the road was buried. But Mr. Ephraim Bell, the postmaster in Brookhaven, 3 miles south, wrote in his personal log on January 12th that there was an eerie quiet between 7 and 8 this morning. There was no Dunwich bell, no bird song, and even the wind was still. He wasn't the only one. 2 days later, a farmer named Grayson noticed that his cattle wouldn't graze in the east field, the one closest to the tree line that bordered the Dunwich. Standing still and facing north as if waiting for something, nothing came. The silence wasn't just the lack of sound. It felt like someone or something was there, like a weight in the air. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring with imagined echoes. When I went into the chapel for the first time, weeks later, I found that the bell's rope was still in good shape. There were no breaks or rot, and the iron bell itself had no cracks. However, the clapper, the metal tongue inside that made the tone, had been taken out, carefully and deliberately placed on the stone altar. Next to it was a folded cloth with a single word stitched into it in Gothic script, Janugu, which means enough. This made me wonder who had silenced the bell and why no one in the town had died violently. There were no signs of outside entry, which meant that the bell had been silenced from the inside by someone who knew what they were doing. It wasn't vandalism, it was an act of closure, a choice that no more sound would come from this place, and that whatever had been said with the Lena Thorne, age 11, was found curled up in a nest of quilts on the second floor of the schoolhouse, arms tightly around a threadbare cloth doll with one button eye missing. Her body had moved, so she hadn't died lying flat like the others. Her legs were pulled close to her chest, her shoulders hunched, and her head turned sharply toward the wall as if she was trying to press herself into it. Her expression wasn't calm. It was tense, with her mouth open wide. There was a crumpled piece of parchment next to her with what looked like dirt or ash on the edges. On it, she wrote in careful, childlike handwriting that she told me stories in my sleep. At first glance, it seemed like a note of comfort, like something a little girl might say after dreaming of a mother who has died. But the more I looked at that line, the more unsettling the pronoun made me feel. It was she, not they, not them. Records showed that there was no one in town who matched that description. Lena didn't have a living mother. She had been left alone during a fever season and raised by the congregation. So who had talked to her? Who had told her stories in her sleep? More importantly, why did her death look so different? When I looked at her body, I didn't find any physical damage. Her heart had stopped like everyone else's, but her fingernails were dirty and had fibers under them, like she had clawed something. It was a weak but present defense. She had resisted, even if only for a short time. And that scared me more than anything else because it meant that Dunn had not been taken in the same way by everyone. Not everyone had gone willingly. Someone or something had been convincing, strong, and calming, but not perfect. There were cracks in the stillness, and Lena had seen them. Agnes's note from Sanctum. Laura came back to my mind. They're not trying to take us by force. They're waiting for us to decide. But what if someone doesn't want to go? What then? Maybe Lena's last look answered that question. It wasn't horror, but confusion, like a child waking up from a dream that wasn't hers. The Bible was open on the altar. The pages were browned by age, and the ink had faded to the color of dusk. But Psalm 13 caught my eye right away. It's a short psalm with only 6 verses, but in this edition, someone had written between the lines in. The writing was neat and almost elegant, and it looked like it was made by hand. It was written in German script below the line. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? There was a note that said, He does not forget. He waits for silence. And below that, Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. There was another scrolled line that said, When light is taken away, true sleep begins. Someone had changed Psalm 13 not to deny it to make it teachable. As I turned the page, a piece of parchment fell out from between the Old and New Testaments. It had a list of names, familiar names, of every family in Dunwich, lined up not in alphabetical order but by date. Next to each name was a number and an exact time, written every half hour. Joseph G. Walden, 1:30 a.m. Lena Thorne, 3:17 a.m. I checked the town register again, and it matched. Everybody in Dunwich was on the list, as if someone or a group had planned not only that they would die, but also when. The list had a title written in faded ink at the top, Order of Settling. The term settling wasn't new. The Stillwater disciples often used it as a synonym for resting, to clear the mind for a deep spiritual pause. But this wasn't a spiritual metaphor. This was a schedule, and Dunwich had stuck to it to the letter. I heard it for the first time on the 5th night. I was staying in the house that used to belong to Reverend Abram Moser, who was Dunwich's spiritual leader. It was cold and empty in his house, just like the others. His body was found in the study, sitting at his desk with his eyes closed and his hands folded. There was a single candle burning next to him. That night, I woke up on his cot under layers of wool and listened to the wind tap against the shutters. Then it stopped. The wind, the creaking, and even the distant groaning of frozen timbers, all stopped. In their place, I heard something else. It wasn't loud or close, but deliberate. It was a low sound, like a murmur. At first, I thought I was dreaming, so I closed my eyes to try to wake up. But the longer I listened, the more the murmurs started to form rhythm-not language or syllables, just cadence like distant chanting muffled behind a wall. It went away after a minute or two, but that was just the start. The next morning, I drew a spiral pattern in my field notes, 17 loops going outward from the center point. That same day, I read through some journals I found in the town archive room. They were neatly stored in a cedar chest labeled Personal Witness Logs. Autumn, 1861. 3 entries stood out. They were all about dreams that happened in the last few weeks before the town went silent. I see her in the snow, standing still with her face hidden. She does not speak. She waits. The voices start softly like water, then they swell. Then I wake up with my mouth open. I saw the town from above, but we were all dead. The writers lived in different homes and were different ages, but their visions came together. That night, I had my first dream. I was standing in the chapel by myself when I heard the breath of dozens of people. They weren't angry or hostile. They weren't even moving, but they were aware. When I turned around, they were all lying down with their eyes closed and breathing in sync. The voice was female, warm and familiar in a way. While I was sleeping, she whispered, "You're late." When I woke up, my lungs were aching from holding my breath for hours. I also thought I saw footprints leading away from Reverend Moser's house, but not toward town, but toward the woods. It was hidden in a false bottom of the Reverend's desk, the same one where his body had been found sitting as if waiting for someone to arrive. With a quiet click, the panel gave way, revealing a stack of cloth-bound papers pressed flat. The book was bound with twine and had a name written in looping, reverent hand in the middle of the first page. Stillwater Doctrine, compiled 1857, updated 1861, property of the Dunwich Circle. Eyes closed, hearts ready. It wasn't a Bible, a prayer book, or a sermon. It was a guide. It was full of observations, meditations, and instructions written in a way that made it clear that the author was sure what they were talking about was real, necessary, and holy. The doctrine was based on one main idea: the self. It said that the ultimate spiritual unity wasn't in life or death, but in settling into a shared mental state through synchronized dreaming, a ritualized collective drift into a resonant slumber where the separation between one soul and another dissolves. It talked about something called the veil hour, a short window of time, usually just before dawn, when the body's natural defenses were weakest and the echo of divine love could be heard. That hour, 3:17 a.m., was when the manuscript said convergence could most easily happen. It also described ways to get the mind ready, such as keeping it quiet during the day to calm internal rhythms and avoiding sunlight for 3 days before settling down. It also suggested getting rid of mechanical noises like clocks, bells, and spoken names, as well as doing evening ritual breathwork in groups of 17 people while saying a single word with each exhale. The last part was called "For the One Who Stays Awake." It was only 1 paragraph long, but it chilled me. Someone has to stand witness. someone who walks through the stillness without going inside it. Because unity falls apart without contrast. Seeker, don't be afraid of being alone. You are not left alone. You are the anchor. It hit me again as I read those words. I felt like someone or something was watching me, but not from behind. It was like someone or something was inside the walls, the snow, and the stillness that covered the whole town. They were still there. No, not really. They were now in a different place, and all but one of them did it willingly. The Dunwich archive was kept in a locked cabinet in the back of the town's small library, which was a one-room building next to the chapel. Its windows were frosty over the fireplace, which was cold for a long time. There were dozens of journals in that cabinet. They were not private diaries, but records of the community. Each one had a number, a name, and a phrase written in German below it. Log of Trump's Dreams. They began in October 1861, 5 months before the town went silent. At first, they were not interesting. I saw my dad in the apple orchard. We didn't talk as we walked. A candle hung in a hallway with no doors. I slept on the floor of the chapel and could hear the earth moving. But by November, patterns were starting to show. The same images were seen in dreams by people in different places. Again, she stood in the doorway just before dawn. The bell rang, but it was under water. The sky over town was smooth and white like a canvas. Our heads were turned inward as we lay in rows. After that, in late. We sang in December. We all have the same pitch and breath. The rhythm was clear to me, but I didn't know the words. "You are almost ready," she said as she touched my forehead. I woke up with my mouth open. We slept together. Not next to each other, but inside. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a figure of speech. They were dreaming at the same time, not in a symbolic way, but literally, like notes in a chord. Reverend Moser began to write down the time. He had kept a record of every resident's veiled dream, which was marked by date and the exact time you woke up. From the middle of January on, they all reported at the same time, 3:17 a.m., each and every one. It wasn't sleep. This was a practice. I went back through the logs again, looking for any change or dissent. I only found one, a note from Lena Thorne, written in a child's hand but with the clarity of an adult. When I'm asleep, they tell me stories. I don't think they're stories, though. They look like directions to me. I don't want to follow them. I don't want to stay still like them. I forget it in the morning if I say it out loud, though. Even at the edge, she had tried to fight back. However, the water had already taken everyone else. The more I looked, the more I saw that Dunwich didn't fall because of a plague, poison, or madness. After it came a voice, but it wasn't from heaven. It was from inside the dream. They found her in the Elkins kitchen pantry wrapped in wool and linen and tucked inside a basket lined with cedar shavings and old hymnal pages. I think the baby girl is less than 6 months old. She is alive, her eyes are open, and she is breathing. But she is quiet. She didn't cry when she was touched or jump when the lantern light hit her. Her pupils shrunk when she moved, but her gaze didn't show any recognition, reach, hunger, or surprise. It looked like she had been left behind on purpose, not by accident. There was a single slip of paper next to her, pressed under the lid of a wooden tea chest. It was a familiar piece of parchment folded twice. She wasn't written in beautiful, fine script. "Get ready." I carried her to the chapel to get what little warmth there was left, wrapped her up again, fed her sugar water with my fingertip, and kept an eye on her vital signs. Healthy as can be. Still, she didn't say a word, move, smile, or show any fear. She looked at me with her blinking eyes as if I were part of the wall and that I had already happened. I found a note in the Elkins family journal from 2 days before the final veil hour when I went back to their house to look for more information. The weight behind our eyes is now something we can all feel. Taking longer to breathe. She doesn't sleep like us. She hasn't ever. She will be safe if she stays behind, I think. She won't get it, though. There were no names or care instructions, just one last line written in a hand that was shaking. Leave the songs behind and let her grow. That night, I watched the baby's chest rise and fall in a mechanical rhythm while holding her in my arms. But I couldn't get rid of the thought. Why did they leave her? Was it kindness? Was she left out of the right based on age or something else? Was she the only one who didn't want to go, or the only one who said no? If so, what did she see as the town went out from behind the veil? Because as I blinked myself awake next to the fire the next morning, I saw her looking at me, not through me, not around me, but at me. I thought I saw something behind her eyes for a split second. Not confusion, not interest, but recognition. The picture was found in the back of the schoolhouse, hidden in a drawer under a broken slate board. It, a broken pencil and a child's drawing of a circle made of stars, were carefully put inside a worn leather folio. It was a daguerreotype picture that was taken maybe a few weeks before it snowed. It showed the steps leading up to the Dunwich Chapel. 4 kids, 2 older women, and a man standing off to the side. The picture is a little fuzzy. The others were looking ahead, and some of them were slightly smiling while others were not. The man, on the other hand, was staring right into the camera. His looks were a little. There is a flaw in the exposure that makes the high collar, long dark coat, and wide-brimmed felt hat pulled low over one eye stand out. He stood with his back straight and his hands clasped in front of him. He smiled, but not in a big, friendly way. Instead, he smiled with knowledge. The town's records didn't show any men who looked like him living there. I looked at the church roster trade registry and the census log. There was no record of that visitor in the guest logs. Who then was he? Why did he stand there with the congregation as if he didn't belong there but was still a little away from them? The answer was written on a piece of paper. After a few days, buried among the dream logs. It wasn't numbered or signed, and it was written in a sharper, more deliberate hand than the others. There was writing on a page called "The One Who Leads Without Speaking." It said, "He walks among the ready. He doesn't teach, he reminds. His face isn't remembered, but it is always recognized. The stillness comes soon after. Always him." People called him the Echo and the Last Bell, but in at least 3 different logs. At this point, I could only think of one name: the Shepherd. He never yelled or begged, he just waited. When the town's breathing stopped, he was the last person anyone saw smiling through the glass door. It began with the sound of a soft chime that was far away but steady, like a crystal being hit in water. Then it got cold. Not the cold wind of winter in Vermont, but something more deeply. Something still under the skin. A cold that made my heart beat faster when I breathed. Next came the room, which was white, huge, and lined with beds that weren't really beds but more like smooth humming stone platforms. I stood in the middle, barefoot and silent. The air was thick, but not with fear. It was thick with something heavier, hope. There were figures all around me, some lying down and others sitting up straight, watching me with eyes that didn't blink. I knew them, even though I didn't know their names. The same people I saw in Dunwich, the same people I buried. They weren't going bad. It wasn't ghosts. They were ready. There was silence until someone spoke. Female, kind and familiar. "You are not on time." When I turned around, she was there. Not Lena, not the shepherd, and not any other face I had seen during the day. It was hers that they had all written about while they were sound asleep. Her face was blurry and bright, like when you look at something right before you open your eyes. She didn't have a robe or a crown on. Instead, she wore a long coat that flowed like fog. Her lips didn't move, but I still heard what she said. We held out for as long as we could. You have to walk the rest by yourself, though. As I woke up, I could hear my heart beating so hard that it drowned out the sound of silence. My lantern was out. The baby slept next to me and didn't move. When I looked out the frosty window, I saw fresh, bare footprints in the snow leading away from the chapel. They were just beyond the blurred pane. I went after them. They went through the woods, past the houses and the well until they just ended. It stopped going away at the edge of a frozen stream. There was no return trail and no sign of damage. One more thing was scratched into the nearby birch tree bark. 3 words were hard to see. Carved deep and without any flourish. You are going to follow. It was found in the inside pocket of Miles Rener's blacksmith body, which was found near the town forge. Rener was 51 years old. Unlike the others, he had died somewhere other than his home. As he lay in the snow, half of his face was hidden by a drift. He was facing the chapel. When the end came, if he had been walking or crawling. The folded note in his coat changed everything. At first glance, he didn't look any different from the others. His lips were slightly parted and his limbs were straight. It was written on rough paper that had soot on it. The writing was shaky, sloppy, and all over the place. I wasn't asleep yet, so I tried not to breathe. I think they saw me. I think they let me write this. And below that, in neater writing that looked like it was added later or by someone else, someone wrote in a different hand, "One town must fall to keep the world asleep." I read it 5 times, then a 6th time. The words, "to keep the world asleep," stuck with me like frost on my teeth. What did they mean? What if the collective dreams that were settling weren't just for peace? What if they were holding something back, a boundary, a balance? And what if by entering that dream together, what was done? Had bought the rest of us more time? It sounds impossible until you remember the time. March 1862. The war had just broken out in the South, killing thousands and turning brothers against brothers. And yet they had chosen silence and stillness. As I read the logs, the doctrine, and the note again, I realized why they had all laid down so willingly. They weren't trying to get away from something. They were holding it. When I got to Dunwich, I wasn't alone. I had 2 assistants with me. Thomas Reich, a quiet, thoughtful man with a background in field pathology, and Jonas Bell, a former chaplain turned records clerk, were put in charge of keeping an eye on and writing down the religious parts of the investigation. By the 2nd week, Thomas had become pale and distant. He stopped talking at meals and sat staring at the frost on the windows as if reading something I couldn't see. One morning I found him standing barefoot in the chapel with his lips parted in silent repetition. That night he had become withdrawn. He wasn't in any of the houses I looked in, the woods, or even under the floorboards of the chapel. His coat and boots were still next to his bedroll. Jonas, meanwhile, started writing down not only observations but also dreams. He said he heard the bell I had seen taken apart ring at exactly 3:17 a.m. He started waking up at that exact time every night, his eyes cloudy and his speech slow and broken. One night, I found him humming a melody I had heard before. He told me it was the same song the people of Dunwich had been singing in his sleep. He said they stood in rows with their palms up and hummed like they couldn't breathe. I asked him what they wanted, and he said, "Nothing. It has already been sent to them. They just echo now." Jonas wasn't there the next morning. His journal was still there. It had only one sentence written over and over again, dozens of times in ink that was getting fainter each time. Now I can see what's inside the silence. I was the only one left. Or, I thought that. Because I heard it too on the third night after Jonas disappeared. The singing was soft and far away, but clear. It came from all over town, not just the chapel. It came from every house at the same time. There are no lyrics or joy in it. It is precise, like dozens of voices singing the same breath or note, which is neither loud nor soft. When I went outside, the snow crunched under my boots. It was dark inside, but I saw something moving behind the windows. Just shadows moving just a little at the exact right time. I didn't go inside. I was unable to. I knew what I was going to find. I knew I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was the only light left on in a town that had already gone to sleep. I left Dunwich on April 1st, 1862. It had started to thaw. The roads were slowly getting better, but no one came to help me leave. I walked 40 miles through slush and snow that was melting. The baby girl was sleeping on my chest, and I had my journal tucked under one arm. After coming back, I didn't talk to anyone for a week. No, nobody would ever believe a report I could write. What really happened would never be found out by an autopsy. What I had seen would not be blessed by a priest. I gave them what they asked for. A clinical report that says that religious and social withdrawal can make mass hypothermia worse. Community of 43 people who were thought to be dead over a few days. All bodies were found. No signs of wrongdoing found. The file was put away and forgotten about. Dunwich was never moved to a new place. The chapel's roof was sagging, and the town was left the way it was. No sound from the bell. The woods crept back over the edges of it like a curtain being pulled back. The signs were covered in moss in just 2 years. People in the area stopped pointing to the valley. Maps took away its name. I didn't forget, though. I couldn't because I wake up at 3:17 a.m. every March 4th. Sometimes I wake up and hear it only once, not very clearly. It doesn't matter where I am or how deep I was asleep. There was one soft note from the bell, not from outside, but from inside. The boy was raised, and the girl who wasn't ready was born. Quiet, kind, and without dreams, as far as anyone could tell, in Montpelier. When I went to see her when she was 12, she said in a soft voice, "They still walk the snow, you know. They never left, they just settled. You'll see." I never told her what I saw. I didn't tell anyone until now because I've been seeing them again in my dreams. The white room with rows of beds and the woman in the coat who is reaching out with a soft smile. They are whispering, "Sleep, witness. You've walked too far. I don't know how you did it." Not sure how much longer I'll be alive, but I know that this Dunwich did not die. It just changed form. One day, when the world is too loud, too broken, and full of endings, it will call again, but this time with sleep instead of fear or war. Those who answer will lie down smiling, just like before.